To say that Jonah wasn't happy would have been an understatement. The people saw him stomping through the city, stomping all the time, so mad as he was leaving the city. Probably describe it in modern terms like a child not getting what they wanted in a candy store. Oh, Jonah was so mad at God that God had not done what he was supposed to do. Then he went, well, maybe, just maybe, if I leave this city and I go over there to that small rise and I sit down, maybe God will actually do what he promised. Yeah, that's what I'll do. I know that God's in the business of doing what he told me that he'd do. So that's what Jonah did. He left the city a little more calmed down than as he left, but still wondering what was going to happen. Jonah walked up the small rise and sat down, and the longer that he sat there, the more that he realized that he actually wished that he had packed something for his head. He remembered years before losing all of his hair, and he didn't really like the sun, and Nineveh in that area was known to be a lot hotter during noontime and into the later hours of the day. But he just sat there waiting and waiting and waiting more, and nothing came. The more that he waited, the hotter that he became. The hotter that he became more tired and started to complain even more. God, you don't do what you said that you would do. I don't know that I want to even work for you anymore. Still silence. What Jonah didn't realize is that God had a plan that was even bigger than he could ever imagine. Right at that moment in time, God had a small little vine growing up behind him. It started to cover Jonah fully. And old Jonah was so glad. Oh, that felt so good. And a little bit of wind came through and felt nice and cool. As he sat there watching to see what God was going to do, all that kept going through his mind is, if I had just had something to eat or had something to drink. He's like, well, I can wait until later. What's important is to see the destruction of this city. Several hours went by and no flames, no fireworks, nothing. Jonah really got mad. God, I knew that you would do this. You don't keep your words. You don't do what you actually promise. You don't do what you called me to do. I knew I should have just stayed home because I knew if I came, you would actually make sure that they were saved. Oh, that kept eating at Jonah. Oh, he became more and more and more and more mad. Till it got to about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was getting really hot at that time, but same time cooling down a little bit as it was getting into the early hours of the evening. What Jonah didn't realize is that God had another plan and another lesson for Jonah to learn. God had this little worm that came up behind him and started to eat this young vine. And all of a sudden, the vine was gone, and Jonah was uncomfortable again. And he didn't know what to do but to start to complain. And he spent the next several hours complaining and complaining and complaining, not realizing that God was actually sitting with him through this whole experience. Jonah became quiet, and he kept watching the city until he saw the sunrise. Or I should say, he saw the sunset. And he knew that nothing was going to come of that city, and He went, well, maybe if I just curl up in this little place and I fall asleep, maybe God will do something in the morning. It was a very, very strange night. Jonah tossed and turned and had very strange dreams of him never going back to Israel, and him ended up being told that he had to stay. He didn't understand that. He woke up right before sunrise and stretched out and got up and stretched and walked around a little bit, knowing that, well, God wasn't going to do anything. So he sat down on a rock and started to talk. It was about that time he finally heard God's voice. And the moment that he heard God's voice, he went back into his rant. Oh, I knew that you were unfair. You. God just started laughing. Me what? You don't do what you say you will. Okay, Jonah, well, what did I say? Jonah repeated it back to him, and God laughed again and said, well, are you hearing how you're saying it? Are you hearing what I actually told you? I told you to go and give the message, and if they did not repent, then the city would be destroyed. Oh. But you should know, I gave the instructions and you did what I've asked you to do. Now you need to stop complaining. You need to think about the people. And even more, Jonah, you need to think about not just how much I love you, but how much I love them as well. But that's not fair. These are enemies of Israel. These are very nasty people. Jonah, if I decide that I want to save somebody, what is that to you? I want you to go and I want you to do what I've asked you to do, but I don't want to do this. I don't want to do what you told me to, because you're not fair. God laughed again. I'm not fair for what? Well, you actually do what you're told, what you say that you're going to do. Sounds like a little child arguing with a parent, doesn't it? Both start laughing, and Jonah realizes what he was saying and collapses on the desert floor and starts to cry. God leans down and picks him up and puts him back on the rock and just holds him as Jonah cries. Jonah realizes that his dreams were true, that he probably would never go home ever again. Right as he was thinking about that, God starts talking to him again. It says, Jonah, I want you to look at it this way. Look over at this city from a distance. Do you know how many people are in there? Do you know how many people are living currently in this city alone right now? Jonah looked at him and said, how would I know? I'm not God. You are. You know, of course. God looked at him again and said, of course I know, Jonah. This is why I asked you to go and to do what I've told you to do. So that not only would these people be saved right now, but there's a possibility that the nation would be saved for this moment in time. What Jonah didn't know was that generations later, the city would be destroyed by fire because of the choices that they ended up making that were even worse than this generation. But that wasn't even in his thoughts at the moment. All he was thinking about is listening to God and what God had to say to him. Jonah took a deep breath and sighed and looked at God once again. God said, listen, just like I love the nation of Israel, I love all the people of the world. Doesn't matter what they're doing, doesn't matter how they look, doesn't matter what color they may be, I love everyone. And as I love everyone, I call you to go and serve and to share my love to everyone around the world. But Jonah, here's something I want you to know. Did you know that there are 120,000 in this city that don't know their left from their right? Jonah looks at God and starts chuckling. So you're trying to tell me that these are some uneducated people. God looks at him and sighs and goes, "Oh, Jonah, this is not a time for jokes. Remember this. At what age do you actually learn your right from your left? At what age do you not know your right from your left?" Jonah looked at him and laughed. "Well, I know some adults that don't know their right from their left." "Jonah, this is not a time for joking." "Okay, God. You're talking about young children, aren't you?" God smiled and said, "Yes, Jonah. I'm talking about kids that haven't had a chance to even make a choice for what they want to do, for acknowledging me as God, or even being able to have life. Jonah, I want them to have life and life abundance." But do you get what I'm trying to say? That's just these kids under 4 years old. Can you imagine how many people outside of them are actually in the city? That blew Jonah's mind right there. And he knew that God had something more that he was asking for him to do. Jonah didn't even know what to say, and God grabbed him by the arms and pulled him up and looked at him one more time. Said, "Now, Jonah, it's time for us to leave, but here's what I want you to do now. I want you to go back into Nineveh, into Assyria, and I want you to share with them my love, my mercy, and my grace. I want you to know that your story will go back to Israel one day, but you will not. Your purpose is to be here and to minister to these people." Now Jonah didn't even know what to say. He wanted to say, but God, you called. He didn't realize that his call from birth was eventually to be a prophet to Israel, a prophet to Nineveh, and a prophet to the world. The amazing thing about this is, even to this day, the tomb of Jonah is still in the city of Nineveh. A story that continues to speak down through the ages about how God chose someone to go and do a task, even though he didn't want to. It ended up being a story that continues to reach throughout time, throughout ages, and even more to the ages of eternity. What is God calling you to do? Whatever it is that he's calling you to do, let's do this together. Here I am. Send me. Whatever you ask me to do, I will do it with all my might. When we do that, we will know that others are touched by the amazing love and power of God, and we will be used in ways that we could never imagine, and even more, in ways that will touch others and bring others into an everlasting relationship with Jesus, and even more, will help them to be ready for Jesus' soon coming.